My father's handwriting was never particularly careful. Loose loops, letters that leaned too far right, the kind of script that looked like it was always in a hurry to get somewhere else. I know this because I spent 3 months staring at it, staring at what was supposed to be my signature on a 529 withdrawal authorization, a document that moved $47,000 out of an account my grandparents had built for me over 14 years, and thinking about how he never quite got the curve of my lowercase g right. That was the moment I understood that some people will look directly at you, hold your face in their hands, and still take everything you have. Welcome back to Ravagestories, where secrets come out, betrayals get exposed, and the people who thought they'd get away with it never do. If you're new here, subscribe, join the family. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Drop a comment where you are listening from. It means a lot to me. Now let's go. My name is Dana Rourke, and I grew up in a small town called Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the diner on Main Street has had the same pie case for 30 years, and everyone knows whose truck is parked outside whose house on a Tuesday night. My grandparents on my mother's side had a small dairy operation out on Route 6. Nothing commercial, just enough land and enough cows and enough stubbornness to make it work through the decades when everything around them was selling off. My grandfather, Ray, wore the same Carhartt jacket from October through April. My grandmother, Lorraine, kept a garden that fed half the road in summer. They were not wealthy people in any way that showed. They were wealthy in the way that doesn't announce itself, in the way of people who fix things rather than replace them, who fold their money carefully, who set things aside. When I was 3 years old, they opened a 529 education savings account in my name. My grandmother told me about it when I was around 12, not as a grand announcement, just mentioned it one afternoon while we were snapping green beans on her back porch, the way she mentioned everything that mattered, quietly and without ceremony. She said that when the time came, I would have help getting to college, and that she and Ray had been putting money in since I was born, that it was mine. That word, mine, settled into me the way things settle into you when you're young and the world still feels basically honest. I want you to understand the texture of the house I grew up in before I tell you what happened in it. My parents, Gary and Patrice Rourke, were not cruel people in the obvious ways. My father worked maintenance for the county school district. My mother did bookkeeping part-time for a couple of small businesses in town, which is a detail that matters, and I will come back to it. We were not poor exactly, but we were careful in the way that becomes a habit. Lights off when you leave the room, generic cereal in the cabinet, one vacation in my entire childhood that was a drive to Niagara Falls and back in a long weekend. I did not resent any of it. I understood it. I wore it like everyone I knew wore theirs. My sister Kelsey is 4 years younger than me. She and I are different in every way that you can imagine two people raised in the same house being different, and I do not say that unkindly. Kelsey was the one who cried louder and got picked up faster. Kelsey was the one who, at 12 years old, had somehow already learned to position herself in a room in a way that made adults want to give her things. I watched this and did not understand it as a child. I understand it completely now. I was a good student, quietly, determinedly good, the kind of student who does not get celebrated much because she does not need to be managed. I ran cross-country. I took the hardest classes the district offered. I filled out my own college applications junior year because my parents, when I asked for help, looked at me with a mild distress that I read at the time as being too busy. I read it differently now. I applied to 4 schools. I was accepted at 3. My first choice was Penn State's main campus, which for a girl from Wellsboro felt like the kind of reach that was almost embarrassing to admit out loud, but I admitted it anyway. And here is where the story turns. When I sat down with my parents in the spring of my senior year to talk about financial aid and what the 529 would cover, my mother opened her laptop and showed me a balance that made my stomach drop through the floor. $212, not $47,000, not even the $23,000 that had been in there the last time my grandmother mentioned it to me, which had been 2 Christmases before. $212 and some cents. I thought there had been a mistake. I actually laughed a small, confused laugh, the kind that happens when your brain refuses the information it's been given. My mother said the market had been rough. My father looked at the table. I want to tell you exactly what that table looked like. It was a kitchen table we'd had my entire life, pine, with a water ring near the left corner that had been there since I was in grade school. I stared at that water ring for a long time while my mother talked about the market. I filed for financial aid. I filled out the FAFSA with shaking hands that I was careful not to let anyone see. I was offered loans, federal unsubsidized, because my parents' income disqualified me from the subsidized ones. The math did not work for Penn State. It barely worked for the branch campus an hour away. I deferred for a year, got a job at a distribution center outside of town, and spent that year in a kind of quiet that I did not have words for yet. Not grief exactly, not rage. Something older and slower than both. My grandmother Lorraine passed away the following November, pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that does not give you time to argue with it. She was gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis. My grandfather held her hand every day, and then, 3 months after she was gone, he had a stroke that took most of his left side and left him in a long-term care facility in Mansfield. He passed 14 months later. I drove myself to both funerals in the same car I'd saved up to buy, a 2003 Civic with a heat issue that I'd learned to manage by keeping a blanket on the passenger seat through winter. I wore the same navy blouse to both. It was the nicest thing I owned. Here is what Kelsey wore to our grandmother's funeral, a coat I had never seen before. Here is what Kelsey drove to it, a 4-year-old Honda CR-V, red, the one my parents had bought her when she turned 16, because she needed it to get to school activities, my mother had explained, in a tone that discouraged follow-up questions. I had walked to school. I had not thought much about it at the time. I was thinking about it now. I enrolled at the branch campus. I worked 32 hours a week at the distribution center while taking 15 credit hours a semester. I ate a lot of rice and a lot of whatever was on sale, and I kept my grandmother's voice in my head, the one from the green beans afternoon, the one that said the word mine, and I treated it like a compass. Kelsey got a full send-off wedding the summer after I finished my sophomore year. Venue, catering, flowers, DJ, the kind of centerpieces that you have to order months in advance. I was a bridesmaid. I paid for my own dress, alterations, shoes, and the bachelorette weekend in Pittsburgh, which cost me $400 I did not have but moved around on a credit card and paid back in 6-month increments. I stood at the altar in a dusty rose gown and watched my parents beam with the particular radiance of people who are getting exactly what they wanted out of a moment. My mother cried. My father made a toast about his daughters and how proud he was. Plural, daughters. He used the word twice. I smiled the whole day. I got good at that. It was the following January, I was 22 by then, second semester of my junior year, that a woman named Clara Finch sat down across from me in the financial aid office and changed the direction of everything. Clara was the kind of financial aid counselor who had been doing the job long enough to have stopped being careful about what she said, which is a type of person I have come to value deeply. She was going through my file, updating some documentation, and she paused at something on her screen with the particular stillness of someone who has noticed a problem. She said, without looking up, that she wanted to ask me something about my 529 account. I told her there was essentially nothing in it. She said she knew, but that the withdrawal history was unusual, and that a couple of the authorization signatures on file with the plan administrator looked like they might warrant a closer look, and she asked me, carefully, whether I had authorized those withdrawals myself. I told her no. I had never signed anything. Clara Finch looked up from her screen. She looked at me for a moment in the steady way of someone deciding something, and then she slid a piece of paper across her desk, a printed summary of the account activity, and she said, "You should talk to someone." Those 5 words started a clock. I drove home from campus that evening with the paper on the passenger seat under my hand like I was holding it still. It was dark by 4 o'clock, the way it gets in northern Pennsylvania in January, and the heater in the Civic was doing its inconsistent best, and I thought about my grandmother's handwriting versus my own, neat versus loose, careful versus hurrying, and I thought about my father's hand moving a pen across paper, forging the curve of a lowercase g. I did not sleep that night. I made a list instead. I called the 529 plan administrator the next morning before work. I identified myself as the account beneficiary, gave my social security number, and asked for a complete transaction history going back to the account's opening. The representative put me on hold for 4 minutes and then came back and said she could mail the documentation or I could request it through their secure portal, and I said both, please. The packet arrived 6 days later. I read every page twice before I called anyone. There were 6 separate withdrawals totaling $47,200. They spanned 18 months. The authorization forms on file had my name signed on every one. The address listed for correspondence had been changed, partway through, to a P.O. box in a town 20 minutes from Wellsboro that I had never lived in or used. My mother was listed as the account contact. My mother, who did bookkeeping for small businesses in town and therefore knew exactly how to move numbers from one column to another. I went back to Clara Finch. I brought the packet. I spread it across her desk and we looked at it together, and she said quietly, "This is wire fraud." She was right, though she said it the way civilians say legal terms, correctly but gently, as if the word itself might be too much. It was not too much, it was clarifying. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Sagar 1343 requires a scheme to defraud, use of wire communications, in this case the electronic transfer authorizations and the online account access, and the intent to obtain money or property by false pretenses. Every element was here. The forged signatures made it clean. The address change made it calculated. The fact that my mother's name was on the account as a secondary contact, that had been set up years ago when I was a minor, which is standard, but which they had never relinquished as I aged into adulthood, and the account became solely mine, gave her access that she had used like a key left under the mat. I found an attorney through the County Bar Association referral line. Her name was Margaret Osei. She worked out of a small office in Wellsboro above a pharmacy, and she had a quality I have come to associate with good attorneys. She let me finish every sentence before she responded. I brought the packet. I brought Clara's printed summary. I brought 3 years of financial aid records that showed exactly how much less I had received because my family's reported assets, including a 529 that now appeared nearly empty, had affected the need analysis. Margaret looked at everything. She asked me twice whether I was certain I had not signed those documents. I told her I was certain. She said, "Good. Just that." The criminal referral went to the district attorney's office, which forwarded the wire fraud component to the FBI field office in Williamsport because the account transfers cross state lines. The plan administrator was based in Ohio. This is the part of the story where it becomes something I did not fully anticipate, which is to say, it became larger and faster than I had built myself to expect. The FBI does not move slowly when the evidence is clean, and this evidence was clean. What I did not know until the investigators began their work was that the $47,000 had not simply been spent on Kelsey's car and Kelsey's wedding. Some of it had, yes, I will come back to that. But my mother had also been running what I can only describe as a modest private redistribution operation that extended beyond my 529. She had been skimming from one of the businesses she did bookkeeping for, a small HVAC company in Blossburg, and using those funds alongside mine to maintain what she apparently considered a necessary lifestyle differential between her 2 daughters. The HVAC company owner had suspected something for over a year, but had not been able to locate it. The investigators found it in 4 days. My father had known about my 529. The investigators determined this through phone records and through a text message, which he had sent to my mother 18 months before the final withdrawal, that said simply, "Just use Dee's account for the rest. She won't know until it's gone." He had not touched the account himself. He had not signed anything. But federal law does not require you to hold the pen. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 371 requires only an agreement and a single overt act in furtherance. A text message is an overt act. I want to tell you about the morning the investigators showed up at my parents' house, because I was not there and I heard about it secondhand from a neighbor who had named my grandmother, and who called me that evening with a voice full of the careful neutrality of someone trying to be decent. She said there had been 2 vehicles. She said it had been early, just past 7. She said my mother had come to the door in her bathrobe and my father had been behind her, and that they had both gone inside with the agents for a long time. She said she was sorry to be the one to call. I was in my apartment, which was a 1-bedroom above a garage on the edge of town that cost me $560 a month, and I was sitting on the floor with my back against the couch because I had sat down that way hours earlier and had not moved. I had a mug of tea that had gone completely cold. I held it anyway. Here is what I felt, sitting there. Not triumph, not vindication, not yet. Something that felt more like the moment after a very long fall. The landing, the stillness, the slow inventory of what was broken and what was not. My sister called me 3 hours later. She did not know at that point the full extent of what the investigation had uncovered, but she knew enough. She had called my parents and gotten no answer, and then called the neighbor and gotten too much answer. Her voice, when she spoke, was the voice of someone whose world had just reorganized itself without her permission. She said my name twice. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I told her about Clara Finch. I told her about January. I told her about Margaret O'Say and the packet and the FBI field office in Williamsport. I told her about the text message that her father had sent her mother that said, "Just use Dee's account for the rest. She won't know until it's gone." I read it to her from the document Margaret had forwarded to me, and I heard her breathing change on the line, the particular quality of someone receiving information that they cannot unreceive. Here is the thing about Kelsey that I want to be careful to say correctly. She did not know. I was certain of this before the investigation confirmed it, and the investigation confirmed it. She had not known about the 529. She had not known about the HVAC company. She had received things, the car, the wedding, money that was slipped to her by our parents in the easy, casual way that parents slip money to the child they have quietly decided needs more, and she had received them without understanding the architecture behind them. This does not make everything uncomplicated between us, but it matters. It is the thing that allowed us, eventually, to sit in the same room. She came to Wellsboro 2 weeks after the arrests. She sat in my apartment on the second-hand couch I'd bought from a church sale, and she looked at the walls for a while, and then she said that she had always known our parents looked at us differently, that she had not known why, had not examined it, had let herself not examine it, because the not examining was comfortable. She said this in a flat, even voice that cost her something. I heard the cost. I did not minimize it, and I did not add to it. We sat there for a long time. My mother was charged with wire fraud, identity fraud related to the forged signatures, and embezzlement from the HVAC company, which added a state-level theft charge. My father was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The cases moved through the federal system with a procedural steadiness that Margaret had prepared me to expect, but that still felt, each time a new document arrived, like something I had to stop and breathe through. One detail. I include it because restraint only goes so far, and also because it is genuinely instructive about the particular texture of my father's character. In the course of the investigation, it emerged that he had been using one of the 529 withdrawal checks, $2,000, one of the smaller ones, to fund a recurring purchase at a sporting goods store in Corning, New York, where he had been, for 18 months, buying and reselling fishing equipment on an online marketplace at a modest markup. He had cleared, by the investigators' accounting, roughly $800 total. $800, over 18 months, using stolen money. My father, who had told me every fall of my childhood that we did not have the budget for the school photos package, had spent a year and a half conducting a minor fishing tackle arbitrage operation on my college fund. I will not tell you this did not make me laugh, alone in my apartment at 11 o'clock at night. It did. It was the laugh of someone who has learned that small people reveal themselves in small ways. My mother pled guilty. She received 26 months in federal custody, restitution ordered at the full $47,200, plus the embezzled amount from the HVAC company, which was an additional $19,000. My father pled guilty to the conspiracy charge and received 18 months. The restitution order on my mother's case named me as the primary victim for the 529 component. Margaret filed a civil judgment to attach to the restitution, which gave it additional enforceability. The HVAC company owner, a quiet, deliberate man named Gerald Marsh, who had been doing business in Blossburg for 22 years, shook my hand in the courthouse hallway afterward and said he was sorry for what had happened to me. I told him I was sorry it had taken as long as it had for both of us. I graduated the following May. It was a Thursday, which felt improbable. I had imagined graduation days as weekends, and it was cold for May in a way that felt almost deliberate, that specific northern Pennsylvania gray that never fully commits to warmth until late in the month. I wore the navy blouse. I had bought a new blazer, charcoal, from a consignment store in Mansfield, and I had pressed it the night before until the collar lay flat. I carried nothing up to the stage except myself, but I thought, for a moment as I walked, about a 529 packet spread across a financial aid counselor's desk, and about a text message, and about the curve of a lowercase g. Margaret came. Clara Finch came. She had driven 40 minutes, which she told me with the slightly flustered air of someone who hadn't expected their own gesture to be noticed, and I noticed it, and I told her so. Kelsey came, and she sat 3 rows back, and when I walked across the stage, she stood up. Nobody told her to. She just did. My grandparents were not there. I know that is obvious. I say it anyway because they were the beginning of this. The green beans on the back porch, the word mine, the 14 years of careful, modest, deliberate savings that my grandfather Ray put away in his Carhartt jacket years, while my grandmother Lorraine grew things in her garden and believed that setting something aside for me mattered. The money was returned, eventually. Restitution orders are slow, and the full collection took 3 years, but it came. I used the first payment to finish school debt-free and put the remainder into the account successor, my own brokerage, in my own name, with no secondary contacts and no P.O. box in a town I've never lived in. I think about my grandmother most clearly when I am doing something ordinary, folding laundry, driving a familiar road, sitting at a kitchen table, not the old pine one with the water ring, my own table, a small one I found at an estate sale and refinished myself over 2 weekends the year I moved into my current apartment. I think about her hands, which were a working person's hands, and about what she was telling me on that back porch when she said the word mine. Not that the money was mine, that I was, that my future was mine, and she was going to do what she could to protect that. She did. Even after she was gone, she did. Because it was her account. Her name was still on the trust documentation as the original grantor that gave me standing to pursue the criminal complaint in the way that I pursued it. Her careful paperwork, filed in a small town in Pennsylvania years before I understood why paperwork mattered, was the architecture of the whole thing. 3 things I carry from all of this, and I say them plainly because this is the part where plain matters. Document everything. Not because you are paranoid, but because memory can be disputed and paper cannot. A 529 statement, a text message, an authorization form with a signature that isn't yours. These are not small things. They are the structure the truth stands on. Trust the people who say you should talk to someone and mean it with their eyes. Clara Finch did not have to do what she did. She was a financial aid counselor at a branch campus. She did not have to notice a signature anomaly, did not have to print the account summary, did not have to slide it across her desk and look at me the way she did. She was just someone doing her job carefully, which is rarer than it should be. Find those people, hold on to them. The hardest part is not the legal process. The hardest part is the Monday morning 2 weeks after it is over, when you are making coffee in a quiet apartment and you understand, fully and finally, that the people who were supposed to make you safe were the ones who took from you. There is no resolution for that specific wound. There is only what you do next with the space it leaves. What I did next was finish school, get a job, build a life that belongs entirely to me, not to the version of me that was supposed to stay small and grateful and unquestioning. My grandmother believed I was worth the investment. She was right, and I refused to let anyone, not then, not now, not ever, convince me otherwise. To every woman sitting in a financial aid office with a number on a screen that does not make sense, to every daughter who ironed her jacket twice to walk into a room where she felt like she did not belong, to every person who has been told we're broke your whole life while watching someone else get handed everything, I see you. You are not imagining it, and you are allowed to find out the truth. Here is what I want to ask you. If you had been in that financial aid office, looking at a balance of $212, knowing something was wrong but not knowing yet what or how deep, would you have kept pulling at the thread? Would you have made the call? Would you have trusted yourself enough to believe that what you knew in your bones was actually true? I want to know your answer. Tell me in the comments. If this story hit you somewhere real, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share it with the person who needs to hear it. I'll see you soon.